I had heard of many rumors and stories that there was a secret hidden story behind the Willy Wonka story, but I had never really believed in them. I thought of them as just nothing but mere jokes and our fan fiction. You know how people like to take things that are normally to be happy and whimsical, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and label Wonka as a creep or some crap like that. I never took anything that seriously and just thought of them just to be with people with active but creative minds have come up with. To me, the Wonka story was nothing else more than a happy and innocent story made for children to enjoy. At least that's what I thought until the day I decided that I would actually find out for myself. I decided to mail someone who's one acquainted with Dell. I was told not to give us anything about this person anyway, so just to see if any of this was true. Considering the fact that everyone had said about the story, obviously some have a subtext about it. Like I would check just to be sure. I was told in the mail, and I quote, "You seem really interested in this subject. Many people would prefer to speculate, but you're the first one who seemed generally curious. Seeing as that you want to know as much as you do, I will send you a tape in the mail. Check within a week." A couple days or so later, that was when the tape finally arrived. It had the words, "The True Story of Willy Wonka," written on it in black marker. There was only the words that they were on it, then copyright date 1963, a year before the book had came out. At first I thought it was strange, considering that VHS tapes weren't around back then. Then it occurred to me that it was possible that I might have been on film and then put on tape later. So I stuck the tape and then it played after rewinding just to make sure. It started out a bit odd. One thing immediately, it just went to the title, taken directly from the first edition book cover, with no fade. It just sort of popped in, causing me to jump, which also made me jump as what came after that, the delayed abrupt appearances of the music, which was loud and sounded like some fast, angry jazz music. Anyway, it cuts to the credits and showed names I've never seen before. The only names I was able to recognize were Dale's, Patrick Neal's, and some guy named John Black. It's kept looping back to the same animation checker for about 15 times. I generally thought that there was something wrong with the tape. Right as I was about to take it out, it popped immediately to the outside of the house of the buckets, with the camera zooming in. The art style was really weird. It was black and white and had a misty, cloudy look to it. It was cross-hatched. But there was a deep male voice that spoke, most likely to be the narrator, but his voice was horrible quality. It was muffled just such a low volume that I could barely make out a word he was saying. It then cut to the Bucket's house with a misty, cloudy look. Was even weirder here. The people moved all wavery-like and wouldn't stop moving, much like those old Zelda CDI games, but the shading was cross-hatched. There was just meant to be a lot of movement, sometimes it was just hard to make out what was going on. The characters behaved oddly. It seems like Charlie was either gay or highly effeminate as he spoke, with a girly voice, and it spoke for love of dolls and princesses. And it seems that everyone feared Grandpa Joe. We all found out later that he was involved in World War I, and it was never explained how, but it seems that he was responsible for ending it. Charlie's parents displayed odd behavior. The dad seemed depressed and the mom seemed paranoid and even suffered from major of obsessive compulsive disorder. The other grandparents never spoke at all. From here, it's just no different from the book except for the characters, that the fact that Charlie sings songs about his dress he wishes to wear, and the story about Wonka is also slightly different. Apparently he's a Grinch and he happened to appear out of nowhere, with suddenly owning an impressive factory that no one saw built. It seems here that no one worked for the factory, nor did it have any problems causing it to shut down. But when Charlie finds the ticket, it happens halfway through the finding. Also, we don't see the other kids giving their interviews as they win, and the message on the ticket is found in the book, or any other film adaptation, is absent. In fact, the ticket was blank. No mention of it being gold, but it is hard black and white, so it was hard to tell anyway. So anyway, the big day came and everyone was waiting at the gate. It was very similar to the book version, except there were 6 kids and Charlie was wearing this dress, and the lines spoken by the people slightly changed from the book halfway through. There were some talks about Wonka being a Grinch, on how his factory got there, and on how they were made. And there was even the story about Prince Pondicherry's death, having died drowned in Wonka's chocolate palace. They talked about more stuff, but it seems that the wind picks up, drowning them out. Although nothing special is there seen blowing, there's just a sound effect of the howling wind. But then there was bells for the chime when it's time for the gates to open, just like in the book. Surprisingly, I can hear over the loud Halloween wind, but to me, the chimes are not church bells like the book describes. They're funeral bells. Very weird, but this is not the weirdest part. The weirdest part is Wonka himself. When the door swung open, you could see a dark, shadowy figure stand in the doorway, and then Wonka comes in out of the factory, hopping and prancing. He certainly does not appear human, although it was some hard to tell due to the style of cross-hatching and the lack of color. Again, this isn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part is his eyes, and he had a reptilian stare that quite literally sent chills down my spine, but his hair kept moving, not because of the constant motion of cross-hatching, it just moved like if he was underwater. The wind was even louder as he pranced and hopped through towards the gate. Once he arrived, he spoke. Strangely, I can hear his voice through the loud and clear, even though through the cheering and talking of the audience was barely audible. His voice was high, like explained in the book, but not the kind of high voice I expected it. He sounded like Michael Jackson, speaking seductively. As normal, the kids had to show him his tickets, which he tucked down his pants, and they walked inside. It wasn't that different from the book, except that there was some stare down the hallway, which looked like a Tim Burton style artwork. They just kept going more narrow as they kept slopping more and more the further they went. They also seemed to be more twisted as they entered each new hallway. The weird part is that there is no dialogue here except from a line from Veruca about needing to use the loo, which her father tells her that probably won't happen till the end of the tour. There is also a slow rising of the howling winds from earlier. I found it strange such a thing that would appear inside the factory. They entered even more a twisted and looping-looked hallway, with funeral bells chiming once again. The odd thing is the art style once they entered the room had completely changed. While still remaining crosshatched and wavery animated, it was now fully like something Tim Burton might have drawn. The narrator from earlier also returned, but he was somewhat clearer. I could tell it was the same voice clip from earlier as I recognized that some of the new reflections. Oddly, he didn't seem to be talking about the buckets like I would have expected him for the intro. I still found him hard to make out, but I managed to catch a few words such as Grinch, Wonka, and he went into something about the Oompa Loompas. At this point, I got goosebumps. I actually did not want to know what he was trying to say here, but I was still very curious. Then everything got interrupted with a long message with a black screen with white text. The writing was in another language. It looked an odd mixture between Greek and Korean, but it somehow managed to look like a black letter, or ITC font. There was no sound here. Everything was in total silence. Through the hallway winds that showed up abruptly a couple minutes in, I expected to return to the show here, but it went on for a few more minutes before it turned to the show. They continued to walk through the twisted hallways, looking more particularly messy of shadowy figures and Wonka and the gang walking through. It changed to a side view and everyone was still black and shadowy, and Wonka was still hopping down with an abrupt change with funeral bells sounding again. Then he was moving slowly. There was another reminding me very much of The Undertaker from WWF, specifically with the Ministry of the Darkness days. Other than the obvious, what I was also freaked about was the fact that I happened abruptly to be changing with no frames. There was yet again no dialogue here from one of the kids, except for one of the kids, which I'm assuming is a girl saying, "I don't like this, Daddy." Suddenly they walked into the chocolate room. No door or entrance, they just walk in. All sound is gone and each one of them shows up distancing and echoey. When they got there, it starts to get really strange. The room looks eerily identical to the one in the 2005 Tim Burton adaptation, but it's not crosshatch, but what looks to be black and white with painting style. The Chocolate River. This is one of the most unsettling moments because the river looked like real blood. If the color element was the only color element that was in the entire film, not blood done in a realistic style, but it was actually like someone dipped a brush of the cup of blood and ran a brush across those parts. What made it more unsettling is that the textures would change slightly from each frame. Quite unsettling because they knew how they could get so much blood to make up. Each possibility, 700 or 1,000 or even more pieces of paper. But that is not even the weirdest part. It gets worse. The room doesn't seem to function as normal, like Wonka is not introducing anyone to the room or showing them around. He suddenly starts speaking about the Oompa Loompas, a group of black pygmies that is smuggled from a deep dark forest in Africa. Illegally, he adds. And they are shown, but their unsettling part is this. Unlike the book that they're happy, cheerful, and always singing and laughing, they look miserable. And every time they took a look at Wonka, they looked terrified. They gave him a look that barely says, "Please, don't kill me." I actually heard one of them say that, although I couldn't really quite tell if he said the word kill, as if he was far away and sobbing. It was then more of an act rather than kill. The camera from at this point stayed at a bird's eye view. Wonka then yelled angrily at the Oompa Loompas with a ridiculously loud voice, as if it was loud, high-pitched, and screechy. I couldn't even understand him. He could have been speaking in another language for all I know. Then he turned back to his guests and said something to them that sounded so shockingly and despicably racist. But then it just continues to get worse. By the end, what he ended up saying about them was just plain abysmal, as well as slightly terrifying. I wouldn't even repeat it. It was so bad that even a white supremacist would be offended by it. Now that I'm not that super sensitive, particularly corrected type that thinks blacks could do no wrong, not a racist either, but even I was distraught from what he had heard. The results revealed to be racist, not surprisingly, but even they were offended. Anyway, the old Viking boat arrived, but it had some odd reptilian designs about it. The gang got in, and I heard Veruca say, "Daddy, I want lots of things, but I don't want a dreadful boat like this." But that was all I could hear. The gang then talked, but their voices were drowned out by a group of crying Oompa Loompas, and they have their overly loud sailing of the boat of the Chocolate Blood River. And they ended up getting through the dark tunnel, but it was close to the one of the Gene Wilder. You know, that psychotic tunnel drive, but I could barely make on any of them what they were saying. Everything was so convoluted. Veruca commented about her underpants being drenched in pee, and the sixth child was still another girl who spoke some of Violet's lines from the film. "What is this, a freakout?" I was absolutely baffled to what this was. I also noticed Augustus was gone, although I assumed he fell into the Chocolate River. Anyway, Wonka did sing his rowing song like in the film, although he kind of sang it how Marilyn Manson sang it, but with extra vibrato. The fast, angry jazz music from the intro showed up once again. It seems odd and out of place. I kept seeing the letters JP popped up in the background, John Black, and then the images become more clear. The background images show Oompa Loompas crying, and some are singing something in some kind of African language. Then the Wonka song starts playing, turning some sort of bizarre language. It sounded like some kind of Yiddish chant. Until halfway through, when they start to have a slight hint of German in it, his eyes got bigger and his mouth grew larger, and his teeth became sudden change to sharp and snake-like. And then it pauses right then for a face for a few minutes, and the funeral bells returned. The narrator from the beginning also shows up, but halfway through, rather than starting out from the beginning, his voice was now more clear. He mentions the Oompa Loompas being smuggled from a deep dark forest in Africa and what peaceful lives they lived. But there were shocking things of horrid things Mr. Wonka did to smuggle them. Again, I will not repeat them. He is about to speak about what happened to them and how his factory got there, but immediately skips to a room that I could barely make anything of was going on. Had no one said about it, I would have guessed it was the inventing room. From here on, it just kept skipping to different rooms, a child disappearing each time. However, it seems that no one knows how they disappear. The sixth child, I still don't know who she is, but I think someone referred to her as Miranda, unless that is the name of one of the parents, who is most likely unnamed in the book, but I'm pretty sure that we're referring to this mysterious sixth character. At least she spoke when the name was said, but there were funeral bells, so it was quite hard to tell if she responded to them. Anyway, the last room they appear, which features Wonka making sick powder. The sixth girl doesn't seem very pleased about it, and Wonka gets extremely angry about this and shouts angrily right in her face. Once again, loud, screechy, and unintelligible. The fact that it was not distant even made it worse. It made it even sound like it's echoing throughout the room. When the girl runs inside the door where it's being made, it then cuts to Wonka's face, zooming in closer and closer. He had a huge, evilish grin about him. Very spooky. I had to keep looking, but I had to see what was going to come up next, so I reluctantly did so. Some of the noises that resemble from those creepy background sounds, music, that you hear something like the History Channel, maybe you know what I'm talking about, are heard, but they are kind of muted and muffled sounding. Wonka's face, once it zooms in closer, it starts to show some disturbing textures that I found were kind of reptilian. It then shows his eyes getting wider and his pupils starting to morph into slits, and his teeth once again became sharp and snake-like. Then everything goes silent with a black screen with the white text appears again, looking as if last time, half Greek and half Korean. Then there was Wonka began to chant something that sounded like Yiddish. It was clearly different from the last chant from the last time. It then showed hints of German in it, albeit more so than last time. The text then flickered to an English translation, but it happened way too fast. Too fast for me to stop and read it, that is. It then went back to where it was, and it was a still picture of the group standing around the room with nothing but funeral bells being heard. It then lasted for about a few minutes, and then it started to go into motion again. Once the funeral bell sounded, I heard someone shout, "Miranda!" So that was her name. Anyways, these two kept walking into the room as Wonka stared down at Charlie. I honestly practically forgot that he was there because he was barely shown throughout the entire thing. In fact, this Violet and mysterious Miranda girl were shown the most. I almost felt like Mike and Violet were not even this one, considering that their names were never spoken. I had also forgotten that he was wearing a dress. I probably thought that was Violet or something. I heard him speak again and remembered that he was gay or highly effeminate, as Wonka went on telling him that he won, but instead of taking him directly to the great glass elevator or whatever, he told him to wait a minute. He then hopped off into another room. He found every one of the kids there except for Miranda. He then said something that I did not quite understand. It was English, but it had a rather convoluted meaning. The children were lying down on the floor, could be heard crying against moaning, similar to the Oompa Loompas. The parents could not be seen anywhere. Then he turned on the radio and slowly began to take off his clothes. The next thing that gave me goosebumps was what was playing on the radio. Ironically, it reminded me of one of those old songs that you hear from an old Mario game when you fight Bowser, despite it being that typical style that you often hear during the 60s, such as the Beatles and the Monkees, but it was only one singer only. It also sounded like the keyboardist didn't know how to play the right note and forgot to play it right. But that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part is this. Now, it did sound like the old distorted, like an old radio, like if it was from the 60s. But there was more in the background, so it was a little bit more hard to hear. Also because it wasn't super loud. Anyway, I couldn't pick up the exact lyrics, but I did hear mention to some freaky people that would happen before to different people by 2014. It was a bunch of random people names being splurted out, but he obviously didn't seem to know who they are. What was going to happen to them was too horrible to mention. I didn't even remember half of it. It took a second for me to sink back into the video as my mind drifted away, absolutely stunned by the music. And when I did, I saw Wonka took off his shirt and throw it off, and then it slowly dropped to the ground. After the credits rolled, all sound was gone from there, appearing what seems to be yet again from names from the intro. I kept rolling to see if there was anything came on after this, only to find a message that was played at the end that seemed to be put later on in the look. The quality and style of it had a 90s feel to it. It read, "Don't let Felicity know." Then the tape stopped. I did not know who Felicity was until I looked it up and found out that it was the name of Doll's second wife. As you may guess, I was quite shocked by what I just seen, but also relatively confused of what any of this was. I went back to ask the person who has sent me the tape, and he told me, obviously this is how Dal originally have written the book. He always made films of these books before he wrote them, so he could keep track of any idea that he had, and also check to see if the lines from any of these characters were spoke outside of not just being said. And what happened there, it just ended up the way it was. I really don't know. But I don't know long enough, but I started questioning the man after I got a hold of the tape. Then I asked the person if they wanted the tape, but they refused and seemed glad enough to get rid of it. Although I didn't want it to be gone forever, they still wanted proof and information to stick around. Ever since I saw this tape, I've been looking around so far if I could see any information on it anywhere, and so far, I cannot seem to find anything. And that, my little pretties, was Willy Wonka beta tape. A Willy Wonka creepypasta written by Crasta. So, my final thoughts on this story? This is actually a really well-made creepypasta. I am gonna be saying this right now. This is actually a really well-made and very well-detailed creepypasta. In my opinion, I have to say, this one is actually one of the, well, I guess you could call it one of the most best and classic creepypastas before, cliches became overused and done and stuff. So, with that being said, I am going to be explaining what I actually liked about this Willy Wonka beta tape story. Now, first, to be completely honest, I'm going to say right now that I've heard of this story of a couple narrations from certain people. And I think the first narration of this story I've heard was from the Shadow Reader. I do remember the Shadow Reader narrated this, and that's kind of one of his old videos on his old channel that I was able to, find, who he was. Now, anyways, with that said, I am going to explain this right now that I really enjoyed this story. This is actually one of the fewest lost episode or movie pastas that actually did pretty good. With despite the fact that I have actually heard about some narrations of this story, the story itself was actually really good and well made. Even though it did have, cliches in the story, like here and there. It did have some cliches in the story. But I am just going to say that right now, that this story actually looked pretty interesting in the concept. There were a few part cliches in there, but I'm willing to, be completely honest that this story was actually really good and really well made, considering the fact that this story could have been, different. But, with that being honest, I couldn't imagine reading anything like this. Now, I could definitely say that this story actually worked out very well, and it was actually really interesting despite the fact that the story actually worked out very well. Now, I'm going to say right now that the grammar of this story is absolutely really good and well done. Like, the detailing of what happens in this, oh my goodness, it's very freaky when I read this story. Like, when I was reading, I was, like, nearly freaked out because of how the concept went. Like, this is all very believable, and that's very good. It's believable, I can definitely see. Willy Wonka doing all this to the, Oompa Loompas and that. All this is very believable. And I could see this being the case. But yet again, if this actually became a real movie, what's described in the book, yeah, it probably would not be for kids. I'm just saying that right now. It would probably most likely be PG-13 or something like that. But anyway, with that being said, I'm going to say right now, the sentence structuring and the storyline of it is just flat out amazing. This is actually one of the best creepypastas I've ever narrated. Now, I did narrate this last year, and I finally had the chance to re-narrate it because, it's been, a while. I was trying to get to it, but I just couldn't find the time to get to it because I've been busy and stuff like that. But here I am. I finally got the chance to sit there and, narrate this story. So I'm gonna say this right now. This story is flat out amazing. Really well done. And to the author, I do hope you made more stories like this. Like, this story was just flat out amazing and really well done. But I would also like to see your other work as well, because this story was just amazing. You did a really good job on this author, so yeah. I did find out who the original author is, because I believe I was watching, Dave the Useless, narration of this, I think it was last week or something, and I actually found out who the author is, so yeah, that's how I found out, if you guys are, like, wondering about that, but, to be completely honest, I'm definitely saying this right now, and like I'm always going to continue to say, so I'm going to wrap up this review because the story was a bit long, so I am going to wrap up this review. I really like how, this is all believable. I really do like the concept itself to be rather interesting and really well done. I definitely say this story was absolutely amazing. Just flat out amazing. Saying with the whole concept, of what's happening and what's going on. It's actually believable. I can definitely see this right now being, like, amazing. I can actually see this being believable. That's the main thing I can definitely say, is that this is all believable. It definitely had a good believability, which that really put me on edge with the story in a good way. So, with that being said, my little pretties, I am going to say this right now, and like I always continue to say, because I'm wrapping up the review. This is simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story is a 10 out of 10. I love the believability of this story. I love how this story is played out. I love how the grammar's good, and the sentence structure's good, the storyline. I just love how everything is just, right then and there, and just makes it very believable. That's a very good positive that I do have to say about this story. I definitely have to say, I really enjoyed this story. So, with that being said, what did you guys think of this creepypasta? Did you all enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better? Leave me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, subscribe because I would like to hear your thoughts are down in the comment section down below. If you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so then you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out of here, and I'll be catching you all in the next video.